Michael R. Pompeo has devoted a lifetime to service, from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where he graduated first in his class, to serving in West Germany and patrolling the wall, to serving in Congress as CIA chief and as Secretary of State from April 2018 to January 2021. He is currently a distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute, where his work focuses on promoting U.S. national security, technological leadership, and global engagement. It was Secretary Pompeo's idea to create the Commission on Unalienable Rights for the purpose of grounding U.S. foreign policy on our founding principles. Under his leadership, America became a massive energy exporter and a force for good in the Middle East, with real peace cemented in the Abraham Accords. Secretary Pompeo's time at the State Department marked the end of naive engagement with the Chinese Communist Party, pulling back the curtain, shielding the egregious acts of the CCP that threaten American jobs and freedoms. Mr. Pompeo's religious beliefs ground him and give him a clear moral compass. He kept an open Bible on his desk in his private office at the State Department and read it every day. His work ethic while serving as Secretary of State was legendary, working from before dawn to midnight every day. Following his remarks today, Secretary Pompeo will be joined on stage by Philip Wegman, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics and a Tony Blankley Senior Fellow with the Steamboat Institute. Please remember to submit your questions for Secretary Pompeo using the QR code provided. Now, let's give a warm Rocky Mountain welcome to a true patriot and American leader, Michael R. Pompeo.
I was born by God's dear grace in an extraordinary place.
Thanks, everyone.
Where the stars and the stripes
Thank
and
you
the
all.
eagle fly.
Oh my goodness! When I get that much applause before I speak, it makes me really nervous. Well, thanks for having me back. It means I didn't do too terribly bad last year, so all good. I will speak. I was asked to talk about the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party presents, and I will absolutely speak about that. But a couple of thoughts beforehand. A lot's happened in this last year. I lost 90 pounds. Yeah, don't applaud. I then have put 20 back on, so pray for me. The Iranians put $1 million bounty on my head, which, $1 million, my wife thinks that's low most days, and there's days she contributes, depending on how I'm doing as a husband. My son got married, so life for us is truly glorious, and it has been such a great year, too. I've seen many of you around the country. You all continue to be so kind and so generous and so supportive of the efforts that I undertook. And I remind you all that it was an incredible privilege that I had. And I thank you for giving me that opportunity to serve America in the way that I was able to do for 4 years. We also stand here today on an anniversary of a tragic event where 13 Americans lost their life in Afghanistan. And it didn't have to be honest with you. I've talked to lots of veterans who served various times, Marines, sailors, Army guys, who served in Afghanistan. Some of them are pretty down. I remind them that 20 years of hard work was noble and important. We collectively, our security team, those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines who served in Afghanistan saved American lives. I saw it when I was CI director. I watched them take down terror plots against our country. And so for those of you who served in Afghanistan or have family members who served in Afghanistan or know people who were there who may just be a little dejected because of the way our departure unfolded, please tell them that I value them, I love them, and their work was incredibly important to the freedom that we all live here in America. So the greatest threat to the United States is not Al-Qaeda. It's not Chairman Kim. It's not Vladimir Putin. It's It's not even Xi Jinping, although that's what I'll talk about. The greatest threat to America is that we teach our kids junk in the schools. But one of the forces pushing for us to teach that junk is, in fact, the Chinese Communist Party, and I thought that's where I'd begin today. I thought I'd begin there because when we think about the Chinese Communist Party, we think of over there. We think of Beijing, or we think of the million people that are being held in what are essentially internment camps, taken away from their families, women raped in a place called Xinjiang. We think about churches in China, Christian churches in China, as the places where it's so incredibly difficult to practice their faith. We think about what is the world's largest surveillance state, tracking nearly every movement of every Chinese citizen. But I want to begin today talking about the threat that's inside the gates here in America. We during our 4 years, fundamentally shifted American policy on China. For 50 years, since 1972, since Dr. Kissinger engaged with China, our policy was sell them more stuff, buy more stuff from them, and they'll become more like us. And I love Dr. Kissinger. I admire his work. I read everything that he writes. But he just didn't work. And it may have been the right decision in 1972. It may have even been correct in 1982, but I can promise you that that model of engagement with the Chinese Communist Party will fail every American. And so 82, 92, maybe 2022, we have to fundamentally rethink our relationship, America's relationship and its place in the world, and what it is that Xi Jinping wants to make the Chinese Communist Party's place in the world. Inside the gates. What does that mean? Well, it means there are 360,000 Chinese students studying in our universities today, as we sit here. That's every university. That's the University of Colorado. It's Colorado State. It's my biggest flagship institution in my hometown, Wichita State University. Every one of those universities is dependent on Chinese money today. Not just the students, right? They pay full freight. They underwrite students who get a discount on their tuition. But the university is taking research dollars. And if anyone thinks for a second that they are providing research money to the University of Colorado school system because they like us, please come see me over here after my remarks. No, they're doing it because we're dumb and we let them. And they're doing it because it allows them to understand what it is we're researching, what we're working on. It allows them to steal the very most important secrets. Secrets like how to make a seed that yields more crops so that farmers in Colorado and Kansas, in North Dakota and South Dakota can be more effective. No, they want to steal that technology. They want to steal technology that allows people to be vaccinated from a virus that they foisted upon the world and killed 1 million Americans from a place called Wuhan. No, they're inside the gates because we've allowed them to be inside the gates for an awfully long time. Imagine that you wanted to go buy Chinese farmland near a Chinese military facility. Yes, you could do it. You could try to do it once, and then you'd be prisoner number 776529 in a Chinese prison. It just wouldn't be permitted. In America, we allow them to do that. We're a free nation. We have a different set of rules. I appreciate, love that, and it is what made us great. But it is silly and dangerous and naive to continue to allow them to use that openness as a weapon against us. We, in the Trump administration, we took the first step, right? Everybody is familiar with 12-step programs. Right, no, from afar. None of you participated. I got it. I can hear the murmurs about Uncle Charlie. I got an Uncle Charlie too. Every 12-step program starts with the fundamental idea that says, I have a problem. Right? It is recognition. And we did that in the Trump administration. We acknowledged for the first time that America is confronted by a regime, the Chinese Communist Party, that wants to change the way our kids and grandkids live. And we are going to begin to right the American ship in a way that will preserve and protect us and create prosperity for the next 250 years on a model that doesn't look like their Marxist, Leninist, nationalist ideology. That was at the very center of what we efforted to do. And we only began to scratch the surface. There is so much work that remains. And we didn't get it right every day either. The Chinese Communist Party destroyed the freedom of the people of Hong Kong on my watch. And it saddens me that we were unable to do more to protect and preserve the promise that the Chinese Communist Party had made to those freedom-loving people. But I'm mostly worried about us here at home. I'm mostly worried about the challenges here. The Chinese Communist Party will use every tool against us. You all would know this because they're around you here as well. And I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist, but make no mistake about it, when they show up from the Chinese consulate in Los Angeles or San Francisco, and they show up at your school board meeting with a check for $10,000 to buy a swing set or new books for your library, it is not because they're looking out for the good health and mental wellness of your children. It is because they're trying to do what the Chinese Communist Party has done here inside the country for years, and that is make friends and conduct a deep influence operation against decision makers here in America. When I was a Secretary of State, I declassified a report that the Chinese had prepared, their intelligence services had prepared. It spoke about American governors. It had the list of every American governor, all 50 of them, and it had them rated: friend, adversary, or we're working on them. They are working on us. They're attempting to use what they call their united front as a propaganda tool to convince us that America is in decline. It should surprise no one that when my successor, Secretary Blinken, met with them in Anchorage, the very first thing that Wang Yi said, he would have been Secretary Blinken's counterpart, and Zhang Zhishe, the state counselor, the very first thing they said to them was about Black Lives Matter. They did that in front of the media to create a global narrative about an America that is decaying and being destroyed from within. We have responsibility. You and this institute come together around this idea of freedom and the protection of our heritage, our Judeo-Christian heritage, that is designed to make sure, A, that what Wang Yi said is not true, that we are not decaying, that we are not declining, that we remain that shining city on a hill. But most importantly, we also have to work to make sure that the world comes to see that we are a fundamentally decent people and that we are still delivering against that great American promise that matters to every American citizen all around our country. I watch them use TikTok. They're inside the gates. If your kids have TikTok on their phone, you should know that the Chinese Communist Party knows what they look like, knows where they are, knows who their friends are, knows who they texted, and may well know their health condition. And that system, that data sits somewhere in a Chinese Communist Party data collection system for whatever purpose may be intended, or one that they can't even imagine today. And the collective knowledge that they gain from that will be used to continue to build out artificial intelligence system that will conduct surveillance against the United States of America in a way that no nation has ever been able to do. I'm sure when I speak in the Q&A, we'll talk more about some of the responses to this, but the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that we must confront this. For years we had known, the United States intelligence community had known, that the largest espionage operation ever conducted against the United States was continuing and ongoing, and that it was headquartered in the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. Why in Houston? Well, there's a pretty good medical system there, the University of Texas medical system. They were stealing secrets from them. And American Energy, that corridor from roughly the Woodlands down to the port in Houston, Texas, has important technology to deliver affordable energy, mostly natural gas and crude oil, to the rest of the world. They were stealing our most fundamental secrets. They were watching what the government in Texas was doing. And we'd permitted this to go on. Why did we do that? Why didn't somebody before me make the decision that, no, we're going to close that consulate? It was because we feared that America wasn't strong enough, prepared enough, capable enough to defend itself, and what the Chinese Communist Party might do in response. Then Director Wray, the FBI, and I conducted an operation, closed it down. We learned a great deal about what they were doing here. Importantly, we send a message to the Chinese Communist Party that our administration was different, that we behaved differently. And finally, we protected some incredibly important secrets that now will be used to benefit job creators in Texas, to keep people healthy and safe in Texas, and that information will never touch the Chinese military establishment's database. These are the kinds of things, small and tactical in one instance, bigger and more strategic in others, that will put America in a place where we can confront them. I'll close here and then happy to take questions on just about anything. I used to say anything, then I became CIA director, and so now I can only answer just about anything. Someone will ask about UFOs. Here's my answer to that. We have bigger problems. But the truth is, the only external threat that actually can change the way we live in America is the Chinese Communist Party. I use that term intentionally, although it's awkward. Right? Chinese Communist Party, simpler to say China. But the truth is there are 900 million, maybe 1 billion Chinese citizens that suffer even more than the rest of the world from the authoritarian Marxist regime in China. They too would love to see a different set of leaders control their space. They'd love to have political freedom. They would often do pray for religious freedom inside of their own country. So we must make sure that this isn't about race. This isn't even about a nation. This is about a political party, the Chinese Communist Party, that has deep designs to change our nation and the course of history, and to ultimately be the hegemonic power all across the globe. We can push back against that. I am convinced that we will. I'm convinced we will, not because of some knucklehead in Washington or some great military leader. I'm convinced of it because of you. You came here today to be with each other as part of this important community that understands what Winston Churchill taught us, right? He taught us that America always does the right thing after it's exhausted all the other possibilities. And you came here today because at least some of you probably fear we're getting pretty close to that. I am confident that you all will help deliver America from the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party presents and the problem set that I identified in our school systems and our educational system as well. And when we collectively all stay in the fight, and we do that, we'll get another 250 great years here in America. I'm convinced of it. You all will still make chili for your church dinner. You will all still lead PTAs. You'll still all thank a police officer on the street for trying to keep you as safe as he can possibly keep you. You'll get that right. And when we do, we'll get that next quarter century, and our kids and grandkids can have the privilege to come to beautiful places like we're in today. And a leader like myself gets the chance to speak with great Americans who love our country the same way that he does. And when we do that, we will be able to turn over to the next watch and say we did our part during our time. Thank you for being with me today. I look forward to talking with you. Greetings. Very nice to see you. How have you been? Good, thank you. I'll take that. You bet.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I've got a lot of questions here. Half of them had to do with UFOs, so kind of sandbagged me there. But I think that a decent place to start would be some of the drama that we've seen over Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. So I put this question to John Kirby. I asked, after she had gone through with the trip, why did President Biden bother with all the drama over Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan? Rather than saying publicly that the military didn't want her to go, why didn't Biden call China's bluff or tell the Chinese to pound sand the moment they started belly aching about her trip? And that's when the spokesman for Biden's National Security Council accused me of trying to manufacture drama. So my first question for you then, because the drama was implicit, is what should Biden have done differently, and what would you have told the Chinese?
Oh, goodness. You're going to ask me to explain the Biden administration. We're going to be up here a long time. Look, in the moment, so discounting whether it was wise for her to go or not, put that issue aside. Once it was clear that the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives intended to go to Taiwan, the only response from America's leadership across the board, political leadership, certainly the White House and National Security Council, but the military leadership too, is she can damn well go where she pleases. And they should have defended that. By the way, I actually believe, and I have some data set that would support it, I actually think if he had said that, there would have been, this was drama created by the Chinese Communist Party, right? It was just it was a member of a nation's parliament traveling to another place. There was no need to create this crisis moment. The Chinese did this deeply intentionally because they believed they could bully America. And we gave them the opening to do that, the space to do that. And I think had we immediately shut it down and said, this isn't that, it's not that big a deal, we're just sending the Speaker of the House to have a meeting, for goodness sake, I think you would have seen a very different pattern from the leadership in China. I think once they saw that they had an edge, a wedge, and I saw this multiple times, when the bad guys think they can push you, they're loading the dump trucks to come drive up and do just that.
Well, that leads to my second question. I mean, I know that you set aside the wisdom of her trip, but looking at this from a prudential question, unless she had some javelins in her carry-on or some new policy to unveil, what of value was actually accomplished? I know that some China hawks have said, looking at the episode after the fact, that if anything, perhaps the speaker just gave the Chinese an opportunity for a dress rehearsal that they wanted, military exercises for the invasion of Taiwan.
Yeah, I don't buy that latter argument. The Chinese need no provocation or no excuse to do what it is they're going to do. They'll find one, they'll make one up, just as I think they made this one up. What value from her trip? She'd have to articulate that. You could argue that sending members of Congress travel anywhere there's no value. I actually think, I didn't mean that. Maybe I did.
This is Pompeo unplugged.
Yeah, no, it's. If I was the Secretary of State, I wouldn't have said that. As an unemployed former diplomat, I can let it all hang out. No, the truth is, I actually think there's value in the exchange of them. It wasn't just her. There was an entire delegation that traveled there. To go there and make clear that the United States has a deep and abiding interest in freedom, a deep and abiding interest in the fact that every semiconductor in your pocket comes from that island. I think there is value in showing up in that way. And so I don't squawk her visit. You can argue about timing, but in the end, if an American leader wants to travel to a place that I believe is a free, independent, sovereign nation, then she ought to take her time, or he ought to take his time, go there and make the case to the people back in their home district about why it was appropriate, useful, and constructive for them to have done so.
I know you said that if we were going to take a closer look at the Biden and Blinken approach to China, we might be up here all day. So this might be a can of worms here. As quickly as you can, though, I'd like to get your reaction to their strategy thus far. I mean, they've kept the Trump tariffs in place. They've taken steps to solidify both military and economic ties in the region through the new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the Quad, AUKUS. They describe China as an adversary. I mean, President Biden on no less than 3 different occasions has promised before the White House walkback that we would defend that island militarily. So I guess the casual China hawk might say, they might conclude that the rhetoric from Biden has been pretty good on this. I mean, what do you think? Do they deserve a passing grade?
I actually agree with that. The Chinese Communist Party and its challenge cannot be a partisan issue. And their rhetoric has actually been B+ish. And by the way, we didn't get A+ either. We had our share of challenges too. The mistake that they have made, the thing that permits Xi to believe he can fire missiles around Taiwan, the thing that lets Xi believe that he can continue to engage in economic warfare against America, is that he's continuing to do it. And the costs imposed on him have literally been zero. He announces that he is going to join hands with the Russians, make common cause with them in what he used the term, the loose translation is an unlimited way. And our response was, gosh, that's a shame. It was not the way we began to think about this. And we did deliver for the Biden administration a strategic framework to push back against the Chinese Communist Party. And they they have clutched out on the things that would make the most difference. And so because they've used different terms, they've walked back this Taiwan thing. If you ask me what the Biden administration's policy on Taiwan is, I could not tell you. And frankly, it doesn't matter that I can't tell you. What matters is that the world doesn't know. What matters is that Xi Jinping thinks he knows. And in the game of deterrence, it is 100% about perceived risk. And if the Chinese Communist Party thinks that the perception is that you can push the boundaries, whether that's through an invasion or a blockade, or even just tightening the political noose on the people of Taiwan, they will push. And I don't think for a second that Xi Jinping has the same level of concern about this administration and its response to his aggressive action as the previous one did.
In terms of deterrence, it seems that a lot of the U.S. credibility is tied to defense of Taiwan in Asia. That's a perception that this beginning. And with regards to deterrence, is this a problem that we can just spend our way out of? Is this something where, if we boost defense spending from 3.5% of GDP to 7% or 14%, that magically it goes away?
Right. No chance. No. I don't even think that's necessary. I know that it wouldn't be sufficient. Because this isn't, in the first instance, the challenge from the Chinese Communist Party, even the Taiwan piece of it, isn't fundamentally, first instance, a military problem. It is, in the first instance, an economic war. And you should know the Chinese Communist Party has been at war against you for 30 years. And we failed to engage at the most epic level. And we have suffered for that. And we have to go begin to write. President Trump tried with the tariffs, right? He took a first pass at it. The concept of reciprocity that I alluded to in my remarks, right? If they can invest in farmland here, we should be able to invest in farmland here. We know how that ends, right? It doesn't end with us with farms in Xinjiang owned by a U.S. corporation or a farmer from Kansas. It ends with them not investing here. That central thesis of economic reciprocity is the clearest path to imposing costs on the Chinese Communist Party. If you want to create a public company, and you want to list it on the Shanghai Stock Exchange, Godspeed. If they want to list on the New York Stock Exchange, we don't even get a chance to audit their books. It's nuts. By the way, if you started a company, your books would be, the SEC would require you. We told the Chinese Communist Party, no worries, you don't want us to see your books, we won't take a look. You should know, too, that one of the requirements of being on the New York Stock Exchange is that it is a private company. There is no such thing as a Chinese private company. We've ignored what we know to be true for so long, and we've allowed them to build their economy on the backs of the American people. And so your question was, can you spend your way out of this? And the answer is, there is not a prayer. You can't build enough missiles. You can't put enough tools up in space. We should do those things. We should establish a deterrence framework against Chinese military aggression. That is definitely necessary. But this conflict has been and will continue to be primarily one of power driven by economic might.
Given that it is a problem, as you said, of power driven by economic might, there still is the military question. And the United States, we can't be everywhere all the time. At some point, do we need to prioritize one theater over the other? I mean, does Biden have his priorities reversed by focusing so much on Ukraine and the threat from Russia rather than China?
The military threat from the Chinese Communist Party is far greater than the Russian military. There's no doubt about that. We've seen the Russian military. By the way, you should know, and you should be incredibly proud of this. They tried to advance on 4 axes across a very difficult piece of terrain. There's only one military in the world that could have pulled that off. And you all own it. And you have dedicated your kids and your family members to that. God bless you for it. There's no military in the world that could have executed that mission. The Russians proved that. Xi Jinping is clearly talking to his admirals and his generals saying, really? You told me you could do X and Y. They're trying to figure out if they can really do X and Y. And from our perspective, we should absolutely be prioritizing this challenge from Asia. What does that mean? That also means we should be, I almost said extorting. I'm going to use a kinder verb. We should be encouraging our European friends to get remotely serious about their own defense. We tried. There's a famous clip from President Trump in 2017 warning them of exactly what you're seeing today. They went there. We're going to close our nuke plants, no coal. We're going to depend on Russian natural gas until we can power our homes with sunshine and windmills. And, didn't happen. There could well be energy riots in Europe in the winter. It could easily happen. Depends what decision Putin make. But the Europeans, Germany and France, the big economies of Europe, are in a really, really desperate position come this winter. So we should be encouraging our friends and allies. So think France and Germany, the big economies of Europe. We should be doing exactly the opposite of what we're doing in the Middle East today. We should be building out an alliance with the Gulf Arab states, just as we did, and with our friends in Israel, pushing back against Iran. The risk to the United States doesn't come from the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Omanis, or the Saudis. It comes from the Ayatollah. And in Asia, we should be building relationships. And I give the Biden administration for continuing that process. They've done good work building out relationships with the other billion-person country, India, the Republic of Korea, Japan, Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, those nations that can, in the first instance, provide a counter barrier, counter force to what the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do throughout all of the Eastern and Southern Pacific.
You've raised the issue of some of the insidious threats from the Chinese here in this country, but I'd like to stay on Europe for a moment because I'm having trouble understanding a lot of our European allies. I mean, I don't know if for the last...
I can call you partner.
Yeah.
Exactly. I didn't get it either.
For the last decade, it seems that they've either been naive or indifferent or in some cases, frankly, corrupt. I mean, the former British Prime Minister, David Cameron, left office and has since set up shop with a UK-China fund, a $1 billion investment front to advance China's Belt and Road Initiative. Portugal, Spain, and Greece all cozied up to Beijing, and then in 2017, they blocked an EU resolution from the French that would have barred foreign powers from buying up strategically important industries. And then when the Biden administration was incoming, they asked German Chancellor Angela Merkel to hold off on the EU-China trade agreement, and she responded by speeding up those negotiations. What is it going to take to get them to take this threat more seriously?
I was in the center of trying to make that happen, and you can take that as how effective I was. I'll give you two stories that get to this, because I think in the end, I'll answer your question very directly. It's going to take observational pain, right? That is, you have to instill in the European mindset a true understanding of the risk that is, and that means leaders going back to their home district and saying, this is a problem. And if they don't, they'll continue to do what they did, right? For 40 years, they allowed our soldiers to serve on the border of freedom, and they allowed us to underwrite it because they thought they could go make money. And that's what they'll do with respect to China. Frankly, it's what we did for 40 years, too. We encouraged businesses to go to China for 40 years, right? So I don't fault the companies that are there today, because that was American policy. So two quick stories. I gave a speech in Brussels, which announced the Trump administration's first real efforts on China. We declared them not a friend or a counterparty in our strategic study, our strategic strategy. But the first speech I gave in Brussels to a group of EU diplomats, not a particularly friendly audience in the first instance, but I gave a speech about I basically said what you did. You all are naive, you've got this wrong, you do not understand what is at your doorstep. I walked off stage to the most silent room I've ever walked, not even a golf clap, nothing. And it was really funny because, so when the Secretary of State walks off stage, you go back in a little room and there'll be a team back there and they'll usually say, hey, great job, sir, that was wonderful. The first words out of my team's mouth were, sir, I didn't write that. Roger that, I wrote it. 2 years later, we had conducted a major campaign to convince them that a company called Huawei was in every one of their network systems and was stealing their stuff blind, even their national security stuff, not just their commercial. And we put a fellow named Keith Kroc, a Silicon Valley guy who became my undersecretary for economic affairs, and we started a process called Clean Network to convince the world to take Huawei out of their systems because it was truly a Chinese surveillance device. our system. And you should know it was here in the United States as well. There were Huawei systems on towers sitting looking over Fort Riley in my home state of Kansas. I mean, it's just crazy. You should know there are no Motorola systems looking over Chinese military bases. Just when you just think about, if you just always think of the inverse, and I'll tell you how silly we have been. 2 years later, the Brits, the Germans, and the French are all ripping Huawei out of their systems. The Canadians are as well. There are 11 other European countries that are trying to figure out how to make the transition. We began to demonstrate to them the risk that was associated. And so that's what it will take. It will take leadership proving to them, because it's not easy. It's costly. They'll have lower GDP as a result of what we are asking people to do in the short run. And so it won't come easily. But you got to make the case. You got to keep the fight up. And then we have many sticks in addition to the carrots. And the Huawei thing's a perfect example. We said to them, you can keep Huawei systems near your military bases, but we will not exchange our intelligence with you if you continue to do that. That was what sort of broke the ice and got them to begin to think about it in a serious way. So we have both carrots and sticks that we can use to educate them about the risk.
What kind of carrots and sticks do you have for Wall Street? Because frankly, the only ones that match some of the European indifference to China that we just discussed are corporations in this country. I mean, Nike lobbied against the Uyghur forced labor bill. The NBA and Hollywood are more than happy to censor themselves if that means preserving market share in Beijing. Apple certainly likes building cheap smartphones over there. Corporate America does not care. So, I mean, how do you separate some of these U.S. companies from Beijing's stranglehold when they don't want to be separated?
Yeah. There are two tools that one can use. The first is you just make it illegal. By the way, we've done this before. There were American companies using money to bribe countries around the world to win business. It's American history. Everybody else was, so we were too. We passed the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. None of these companies really wanted to be in that game, but they were in it because that's what it took, right? And so that's the same narrative they would tell today. Mike, our competitors are there doing this. If we're going to stay at the forefront of technology, we must be there too to access that billion-person market. You simply tell them they can't. And so we started this, not on widgets, not on plastic things, whatever, more beach balls from China, whatever. But when it comes to semiconductors, when it comes to transistors, when it comes to healthcare products, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, we began to put these on banned export lists. So you can actually use an American forcing function to do that. It is important when you do that you bring the rest of the world with you. You don't want to pull our stuff out and allow the German stuff to go in. So you have to begin to have friends and partners in that very endeavor. And we made, on the very highest end stuff, we began to do that. That's what we did with Huawei. We banned Huawei equipment on American systems or any federally contracted property. We made it unlawful. And it very quickly, by the way, I saw a report yesterday that says Huawei may actually have to close. We may have actually crushed one of the Chinese Communist Party's largest espionage operations. I pray that we got it right. You still have semiconductors flowing from Taiwan to China that we have to figure out a way to sever, and if we do, we will have achieved that objective. And I think the Biden administration is trying to do it right too, and I'm counting on it. So the first one is rule of law, and there's some piece of this that we can do. Second, it's already happening. You identified half a dozen cases. Those are real and serious, and we should admonish them, certainly for those who are engaged in practices where there are massive human rights violations in the facilities they're operating. That is unconscionable, and we should shame them into leaving. But I will say that the good news is over the last we're now coming on 3 years, I've watched American corporations begin to disengage on their own. What do I mean by that? America's largest companies today are not reinvesting in China in the way that they would have 3 years ago. If they need a new factory, if they're going to build a new technology, they're trying to find another solution. Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, Arizona. I didn't mean to lump them all together. I could distinguish amongst those. But they're going someplace else because they now can see the political risk. Ukraine's had an impact on that too, Philip, right? You watch these big companies, including America's largest banks. I think Citigroup yesterday announced they were winding down their operations in Russia. They'll write off billions of dollars in so doing. They have 2 zeros to the left of the decimal place more risk in China today. I mean, massive assets on their balance sheets. And they can now see the risk associated with that. Either America will do something to make those assets worth less, or the Chinese Communist Party will actually nationalize them. And so they are beginning, and I have seen this in boardrooms all across the country, beginning to think, how do I reduce my risk in China? Purely commercial, purely self-interest, purely shareholder value creating decisions to create less risk there. It'll take, much as it took us 35 or 40 years to get there, it won't be overnight. That market is still real. Right, it's 1 billion people, and there are, on the consumer end, companies that still want access to that. Fair enough. I don't think we have to stop selling everything there. I don't believe that in the end, maximal decoupling will be the thing that will drive this to the right place. But on the things that matter, the things that are even remotely connected to American security, our health, our well-being, our educational institutions, those are things that we are going to have to break into 2 blocks. There will be a Chinese, Russian, Iranian, Venezuelan, North Korean block, and then there'll be those of us who love humanity in the other block. And I think you see that emerging already today.
Taking that a step further, Human Events described you as an officer and a free marketeer in 2011 when you first came to Congress. And I'm curious to hear from you how your thinking on the free market has changed.
Yeah, I gave up.
Well, for instance, more than just rule of law, I mean, there are some like Senator Rubio who says that it's time for the government to have a full-throated industrial policy where the public and the private sector join hands for things like semiconductors and steel. Is that the appropriate move? Or, as another one of your colleagues, former Ambassador Nikki Haley, said, that's just socialism light?
Yeah. I still believe that markets make sense. I think that is the solution that has driven the very prosperity that created this beautiful place and our great country. But those markets have rules, and they have to be fair and reciprocal. And this was the failure of the 40-year process. When you begin to move to industrial policy, you begin to get on very dangerous grounds. I abrogated my Tea Party credentials on something called the CHIPS Act. So I started this process trying to move 2 big, important national security resources. Rare earth minerals that go into a lot of things that matter to American security, and semiconductor wafer manufacturing, which we abandoned here in America, I don't know, I think it's 14 years ago when we made the last high-end semiconductor wafer. It's all American technology, all stolen. The chairman of TSMC, who runs the only company in the world that actually makes super high-end semiconductors, is an MIT graduate. We gave it up because our markets wouldn't permit that to happen. You have to build a new fab plant every couple years. They cost $7 billion. Intel and the manufacturer were getting crushed. So I concluded in the end for American national security that you, the taxpayer, ought to underwrite bringing that onshore. And it became the CHIPS Act. It moved a lot since my initial proposal, but nonetheless, it's going to work, I pray. There are 3 big fab plants being built, one just outside of Phoenix by a company, by TSMC itself, one outside of Columbus, Ohio by Intel, and one outside of Austin, Texas by Samsung, the other big global semiconductor wafer manufacturer. And we will onshore that talent and that work. And I think you could say that's not free market, but if we stop the Chinese chips from being dumped here, we would have shaped a market that would get us to this same place. I just concluded ultimately we only had 3 to 5 years to protect that and build it back. And so I suffered the ignominy of asking the taxpayers for what would have been $40 or $45 billion to get those folks back on shore. And to, interestingly, to train Americans. TSMC has, I think it's still ongoing, 8,000 Americans in Taiwan today studying on how to do this, because there wasn't a single American that could actually deliver everything that goes into constructing and manufacturing semiconductor wafers. So we lost the bubble. We lost it. We lost it because we were foolish and let the Chinese walk on us. And for a pretty significant price, I think we're going to be able to get it back.
Today marks the 1-year anniversary of the attack at the Kabul airport, where we lost 13 U.S. service members, as well as 170 Afghan civilians. Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff says that was a logistical success, but a strategic failure. The White House released a memo this month saying that, quote, bringing our troops home strengthened our national security by better positioning us to confront the challenges of the future, like China's increasingly assertive moves in the Indo-Pacific. What lessons did China take from that chaotic withdrawal? And perhaps more importantly, what lessons did our allies take from that withdrawal?
Oh, goodness. I think, so the most important question is, what lessons did we learn? But I'll answer your question, and I'll get to the one I think really, really matters. The Chinese learned that America may walk when it matters most. Our allies saw the same thing. It wasn't that we were walking away. I was in the middle of that. From day one, the CIA had very significant operations in Afghanistan. And so as President Trump's commitment to you that he would get our kids home from there was being worked upon, I was at the very center of trying to figure out how to deliver that. And then became Secretary of State. I was the one that conducted 2 negotiations. Rachel Maddow only talks about one of them. We negotiated a deal with the Taliban, for sure. President Biden only talks about that too, right? His team blames us, right? They say, well, Pompeo started this. Nothing could be further from the truth. We had a second arrangement with the Afghan government, signed the same day. I was in Doha. Secretary Esper was in Kabul. We signed 2 agreements to try and shape what Afghanistan would look like after we got the remaining 20 or 30,000 Americans out. And I think our allies saw that they had a president sitting in the White House who made a deeply political decision. We had worked with our allies. Remember, it wasn't just American forces in Afghanistan. It was a NATO operation. About 2/3 of the people on the ground were NATO soldiers, not ours. We were doing most of the heaviest lifting, for sure, but there were 2/3 of them were NATO soldiers. We'd gone in together, and we were prepared to go out together with them, and we had a conditions-based plan to deliver for the president. But I never got there, Philip. I never got to where I could look the president in the eye when he would say, my Mike, get us the heck, he used a different word, get us the heck out of there. We're not going fast enough. We got from 15,000 to about 2,500 uniformed Americans there. But I could never look him in the eye and say, Mr. President, we can deliver the other conditions that we'd promised you we would deliver. We weren't there. And we were right that we weren't there. When President Biden made a different decision than President Trump made for his 4 years, you saw the debacle. I get asked all the time, what would have happened the next day if you'd have been there on the 21st of January or the 22nd? I can't answer that. I wasn't there. I can only tell you that for 4 years we didn't do what they did, in spite of the president's promise to you that we would, that we'd get everybody home. But we also had a commitment that we would get every American out of there, that we'd get all of our equipment out of there, and that we would make sure that we were not attacked from that place again. And we were unable in our 4 years to get it, and we got to 2,500. And there we sat. By the way, President Biden's team will tell you, well, it was unstable. If we hadn't pulled out, it would have all fallen apart. Maybe. Again, if President Trump was sitting there, he'd say, no way, it couldn't happen, right? I don't do counterfactuals. I can tell you this. From the day we signed those agreements, not a single American was killed. And it's not by chance that no Americans were killed. It's not by chance that Kabul didn't fall during that time. It was because when the Taliban violated their agreement, we killed them. I don't know how to put it any more simply than that. It would go like this. Scotty Miller, someone I'd known since we were cadets at West Point. Scotty Miller, who was then commanding the troops in Afghanistan, would call me and say, Mr. Secretary, the Taliban violated the commitment they made to you. And I don't want to upset your negotiations, your diplomacy, but they've violated the commitment. I said, go. And the Afghans would fly F-16s with our intelligence, and we'd go whack them. And I would call my counterpart, and he'd say, you killed us. You're not supposed to be killing us. We have this deal. And I'd say, you violated the deal. You didn't live up to your commitment. And he'd say, no, you're wrong. And I'd say, we'll show you the satellite photos if you'd like to see them. You were where you weren't supposed to be. And he would then say, well, I don't have total control. And I'd say, if you don't have total control, why am I talking to you? And he would then hang up the phone, and we'd get on with life, and they wouldn't kill Americans. and they wouldn't move on Kabul. We had established a level, at that point a tactical level of deterrence that had, for the moment, through noon on January 20th, we had a set of understandings about how we would proceed. And the procedure was going to be, we were going to continue to work to convince the Taliban, and it might never have happened. It might have been 40 years. They might never have changed their stripe. They might have continued to harbor al-Qaeda. So be it. But so long as they did those things and didn't live up to their commitment, we were going to do the things that preserved American freedom. And that's what we did. And the Biden administration chose a different path. They ripped up the plan. They set a date certain. And we all know what happened from there.
You mentioned that no American servicemen were killed during, I think it was that 18-month stretch. But certainly our Afghan allies were targeted by the Taliban. I mean, were we under any illusions? I mean, their nature did not change. They were very clear about what they wanted to do in that country. Was negotiating with them, now that they clearly have violated the Doha Agreement, was that a fool's errand?
Oh, no. Absolutely not. No, they violated the Doha Agreement from the moment I walked out of the hotel room. No, they were in violation of the agreement as we signed it. It wasn't, no one in the administration, certainly not me, believed for a second that the Taliban had changed its stripes. I simply knew that if our mission set was to do the things that America needed done, stop terror, get our people home, stop spending $30 billion a year, focused on the Chinese Communist Party, these things, that we were going to have to get the Afghan people in the room together to negotiate a resolution to this. This was necessary. And so we did. We had all the Afghans. Everybody talks about beating with the Taliban, but there were women in the room. I had women sitting next to the Taliban. It drove them nuts. It made me happy. No one, the Trump administration was the first one that achieved that. And you could argue it's meaningless. It's not meaningless. In the end, they're going to have to find their own path forward. And so our theory was it might take 10 years, right? When we set a peace deal with the FARC in Colombia, the FARC hadn't changed their stripes. It took 10 years, and they got to a pretty good place. It might have taken 10 years to actually achieve the outcome, to get the various tribes. You had people, you had the folks from the north, you had the people from Herat. We were all in the room. It might have taken them 10 years to sort that through. It might have taken 10 hours. One doesn't know. But in the end, that resolution was going to be an Afghan resolution, and our mission set was to reduce our cost and reduce our risk and protect America. And we did that.
One more question on Afghanistan, and then I've got a number here that I want to get to from the audience. Did the United States, by trying to make the Middle East safe for democracy, did we take our eye off the ball with regards to China? Was the Bush doctrine of sort of lifting these folks up to self-government, was that always a flawed mission?
We can all draw our own lessons from history. It was ambitious and not achieved. We can say those things for sure, and you can absolutely say that we didn't confront the Chinese Communist Party. So the answers to your questions as a factual matter are certainly true. It does mean I take no joy in critiquing what happened 15, 20 years ago, decisions that were made in the aftermath of attacks at 9/11 that still piss me off to this day. Going forward, we had a much different view of how to proceed in the Middle East and elsewhere too. We didn't send the 82nd Airborne or the 101st to go solve those problems, and we solved them. There is no doubt in my mind, and I don't think anybody can challenge that when I walked out of the office, the Middle East was more stable and more prosperous and less likely to create risk for American kids to have to go fight and die there someday than the day that we came in. And it wasn't real genius. I wish I could say, I had the Abraham Accords written in my diary before I came Secretary of State. We didn't. It came from a theory of the case about American power and American restraint. And you can accomplish each of those things simultaneously. They are not mutually exclusive concepts. And so we used American power where necessary, and we were incredibly restrained in other ways, always thinking, how do we deliver better outcomes for the people here at home, and recognizing that most of the conflict of the world will end up being about energy and economics, and using that thing which America has an enormous advantage in, using that tool of force, not sending 100,000 folks to go station and garrison someplace, in a way that delivers really good outcomes.
So very quickly, just a bit of a lightning round here. Nothing seems to galvanize people like a pandemic. On the question of COVID, you told National Geographic in May that the scientific evidence is very strongly leaning towards COVID having come from the lab in Wuhan. That was May of 2020. Dr. Fauci dismissed the lab leak theory early on. You supported the decision to pull out of the World Health Organization in July of 2020 when I questioned Dr. Fauci about Dr. Tedros' close ties to China and about the World Health Organization covering for China's lack of transparency.
Wow, I was busy.
Dismissed that criticism. You said in this October, that, quote, Dr. Fauci was not honest with the American people and that taxpayer dollars went to China for gain-of-function research on viruses. So my question to you is, when you were in the administration, when did you lose faith in Dr. Fauci, and did you ever suggest to President Trump that he be replaced?
I was Secretary of State. It wasn't my deal.
This was a whole of government response.
Whole of government response, yes. It took time. These were the experts, right? What do I know about viral transmission? So it took a little while for us to recognize that we were being sold a bill of goods by the, quote, experts, end of quote, inside the administration. Certainly took me a while to do that. I won't talk about things that I recommended to the president that he did or did not do, unless he's already talked about it. He hasn't spoken about that. But suffice it to say, as we stare at this problem set today, that lab is still open. And I can't prove it, but man, I can make a lot of money betting against you that it came from that lab. That lab is still up, operating at the same risk level to the world that it was operating at before. And I think it's the case now that American dollars aren't going there, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
One of our audience asks about the threat of general American data collection, and I want to add to this. You mentioned TikTok. TikTok is going to be partnering with the Association of Secretary of States and also with Ballotpedia for the coming midterm elections. The idea being perhaps that through those channels, the CCP would have access to voter data. They could promote certain information. This threat. I know that you said that it would require a bit of operational pain, but how is it that you actually counter that when there's no Huawei here in the United States to deploy with carrot and sticks?
Oh my gosh, you should ban TikTok. That's pretty easy.
Okay.
Look, the Indians banned 30 Chinese apps on their way to 300. Their kids are okay. In fact, we hire a lot of them. And they're in our schools too. The worry about banning TikTok is always moms will be unhappy because they lose a babysitter. Sign me up for human babysitters that cost X bucks an hour more than TikTok. You cannot allow the Chinese to have their tools that belong to the People's Liberation Army and their security service, the MSS, sitting and residing on American networks. It's just unacceptable. And to give them access through these consumer tools, I wasn't tracking that they were working with Ballotpedia. That seems bad. It shows a fundamental lack of seriousness in my view. And by the way, we didn't get that done either. We got close to the TikTok prohibition, but there were big fights inside the administration. Not everybody in the administration shared my view of this, and I ultimately was unsuccessful.
I can't tell you how many questions are in here about faith in general institutions like the DOJ or the FBI. So pivoting from that a little bit, but staying on the same topic, you mentioned Chinese espionage efforts, and I think it wasn't long ago that you said, again, like you did today, that threat was inside the gates, not just in Shanghai, but in Des Moines and Phoenix and Tallahassee. What about Mar-a-Lago? Do you think that the Secret Service, they apprehended 2 former Chinese nationals. Do you think that there was any legitimate reason for the Department of Justice to be worried or concerned about the security of papers that were being held there?
I don't know what they knew. I don't know what papers were there. Anybody who takes classified information outside of the places it's supposed to be should give that information back. That includes presidents, former secretaries of state as well, all of whom have access to lots of classified information. It is Sometimes overclassified, and if you've been there, you can say, well, that shouldn't be classified. Well, if it shouldn't be classified, declassify it. And so long as it's classified, we're going to protect our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And there are legitimate concerns from the intelligence community about where that information travels. You can hold that thought in your head, at the same time not believe that it's appropriate to send the FBI guys in to raid a former president's home. Those are not mutually exclusive ideas. And my judgment is that, and it remains to be seen, it is my judgment that that was an overtly political act that will fundamentally reshape the political landscape in the United States in a way that we will all regret for an awfully long time.
I have two questions, and then we're done here. I would think we could stay here all day. China has repeatedly targeted elected officials, whether it's mayors in the Midwest or whether it's members of Congress. Recently, the former president even called into question the allegiance of his former transportation secretary. He said of Elaine Chao, whose father is the founder of the Chinese shipping company, that she reportedly didn't disclose during her confirmation hearing, that the Chinese had her and Mitch McConnell, quote, over a barrel, and that the GOP minority leader should spend more time getting Republicans elected and, quote, less time helping, this is the former president's words, his crazy wife and family get rich in China. Is that criticism fair, or is that paranoia?
I saw no evidence that either Senator McConnell or Secretary Chao was engaging in behavior that was inconsistent with their love of America. I just never saw it. Apart from that, are you asking the question, should we be worried about the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to influence America's most senior leaders by running, I'll use the term lightly, agents, influence operators against us? You should absolutely be worried about it. In California, you saw it happen to a congressman. You should know I saw other instances that are not public where they came at very senior officials in senior ways. It is often difficult to detect because they come in the form of someone that you already know, a business colleague, someone who you're engaged with. And there is an enormous counterintelligence piece of work that needs to be done to protect both the information and the people, including you, business leaders, who the Chinese are running people at every day inside of your company. I must say, if you have 150 employees in your company, you can take to the bank that some one of those people has been touched in a significant way by a Chinese influence operator trying to figure out what's there and what they might be able to do. It's small, it's light, they'll go on their way, but make no mistake about it, the scale of this operation is very, very significant.
Final question to wrap up. Secretary Pompeo, I'm not being glib when I ask this. Do you want to run for president?
Yeah, thanks.
Let me rephrase that so that I don't get the same answer that you're
going to get the same answer, don't
worry.
No,
let me rephrase that. Do you want to be president? Do you think you'd be of service there?
That's the question. You asked the actual right question. So thank you for the kind applause. I think some of you are hoping that I'll keep praying and go back to teaching fifth grade Sunday school. The only question that anyone should ask if they're thinking about doing this is, can I have an impact in a way that can preserve this republic for another couple hundred years? Do you believe that you are that person that can build a team and speak to the American people in a way that can do that? I've had a lot of experience where I've seen ways that it doesn't work, and I believe I bring a lot to that. What my wife and I will ultimately choose to do, I don't know. I don't hide this. We've got a team in Iowa. I'm headed back there next week. Going to New Hampshire. These are not the things one does because one is doing anything but thinking about presenting their case to the American people. We will, by the end of the year, beginning of next, we will make that incredibly important decision, certainly important for the Pompeo family, but important for America that to present that case and make the argument to the American people. We'll figure it out here shortly, and we'll see what the Lord puts in front of us for our nation and for the Pompeos.
Will that decision be independent of what any other individuals might do?
Yeah. Of course. Goodness knows who all may run. Everybody knows the cast of 10 or 12 that everybody's got on their list. I promise you there's 10 or 12 that aren't on that list that are thinking about it as well. Susan and I will make that decision just the way I described it. And then everybody else will make their own decision, and we will go compete. I hope we'll go compete in a way that shows dignity and grace and love for the country, and in a nuanced way that you can value and make informed judgments about. That has proven difficult just because of the nature of our media today, but I hope that we have a competition that is about things that really matter.
Secretary Pompeo, thank you for your candor.
Thank you.